crazy sort of haunted houses, interdimensional parasites, ex-superheroes risen from the dead, revolutions, and little girls that just hate fairyland. All that and more appeared in the books that I read this month. And no, I'm not an advertisement. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ella, and in today's video I'm going to talk about the books that I read in the month of January. Some were good, some were and some were bloody fantastic. So without further ado, let's start with the first book that I read in January. So the first book that I read this month was less of a book and more of a comic volume. And I read the first volume in the Young Avengers comic series, which is published by Marvel, called Style Over Substance. Now, here's the thing that really irked me with this comic volume. It was basically the good kids version of Runaways. Runaways, which was also a comic series that was published by Marvel, is all about a group of 6 teenagers that find out that their parents are supervillains, that they themselves are not quite normal, and so they run away in order to fight their evil parents. Young Avengers was all about a group of teenagers, they're the sons and daughters of superheroes, and on this interdimensional parasite comes into their reality and basically makes all the parents go evil. They run away in order for them to fight their parents. Do you see the similarities here, guys? Like, that really irked me. But other than that, I actually quite enjoyed this first volume. I think that it was definitely substantial and it didn't suffer from the whole I'm a first volume in a comic series and so I'm going to just set up the entire plot syndrome. It definitely stood out on its own, and there were some great pages of just beautiful art, as well as I really enjoyed the humor of this book, which is why I decided to give it a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I'm definitely going to continue on with the series. Hopefully I'll be able to get my hands on the second volume, since apparently it's really hard to find online. So the second book that I read this month was actually my first 5 out of 5 star book of the year, and that book was Endangered by Elliot Treffer. I think that's how you say her name. This book, at its core, is a human and animal friendship story. It's about Sophie, who's a 14-year-old girl that visits her mother in Congo and saves Otto, who's an infant, abandoned bonobo, from the streets. Only quickly it becomes a survival story. As a revolution breaks out in Congo, the government basically gets teared down and chaos erupts in Congo. This book, guys, is amazing. I found myself so completely immersed in the story. I thought about it all the time. And what I loved the most was how genuine all of the characters were. Not only humans, but the monkeys, well, bonobos as well. Like, for somebody who knew nothing about bonobos, like I didn't even know that such an animal existed before reading this book, you also found out a lot about bonobos. And I think this is definitely a great book for anybody who really enjoys, you know, the human and animal friendship stories. This month I actually tried reading something that I never read before, and that was a poetry collection. And I read No Matter the Wreckage by Sarah Key. Now a picture will appear here. And No Matter the Wreckage is a spoken word, if I'm not mistaken, poetry collection, which I have to say that for the first poetry collection that I ever read, I quite enjoyed it. Obviously, for any sort of collection, be it short stories, poetry, essays, whatever, there will be some that you like more than others, which was definitely the case here, which is why I can't exactly give it that 5 out of 5 stars. But I did really enjoy most of the pieces that were in this book. The main problem that I had really was getting into the rhythm of reading a poetry collection and like reading the different pieces, but I think that had to do more with me and being like a first-time poetry reader rather than the book having anything wrong with it, or the poetry having anything wrong with it, which was why I decided to give it a 4 out of 5 stars. Because on one hand, it's definitely my experience that, you know, decides how I rate a book, but on the other hand, I can't really fault the book for something that I've like never really tried before. Do you get what I mean? Like, I never read a poetry collection before, so the fact that I found it really weird and the fact that it took a lot of time to get into the rhythm of reading the poetry that was in this book had nothing to do with the actual poetry and more to do with me. So like giving it any less of a rating was not something that I'm quite comfortable with. So it's definitely a 4 out of 5 stars, and I do think that people who have read like a lot of poetry before would actually find this to be like a 5 out of 5 star book, since it did talk about a lot of things that were relevant, and I did definitely get and connect with a lot of the things that she was saying through her poetry. So that's definitely a good poetry collection, and it's definitely a good place to start, I think, as well, for somebody who's just getting into poetry. Like, for a first-time poetry collection, it was definitely a positive experience, and I definitely now want to read more poetry collections. So the next book that I read this month was actually one that I had quite high expectations for, and that book was Gourmet by Muriel Barbary. Now, this is the companion novel of The Elegance of the Hedgehog, which was one of my favorite books of last year. And this book tells you all about this one major event that really sets off the story and The Elegance of the Hedgehog. Gourmet Rhapsody is all about the last 48 hours of a food critic. Now, basically, from the moment that he finds out that he's about to die in about 2 days, all he really cares about is once again tasting what he considers to be the perfect taste. He's kind of like in a hunt down memory lane in order to find what was the perfect meal that he ate. And that gave way for quite an interesting structure in this book. Like always, her books are very character-driven books, and so this book was really us finding out about this food critic. And we found out about him in 2 ways, and it was quite interesting to see the differences between those 2 ways. One way that we found out about who this food critic was through his perspective, and he basically told us about all these amazing meals that he ate throughout his life, and then everything that had to do with his life when he ate that meal. The other way that we found out about the food critic was from the perspectives of objects and animals and the people around him, and they basically told us who this person was, but from the way that they perceived him to be. So it was quite interesting to see the difference between who he thought he was as a person and who he really projected out to the people around him. It kind of makes you think as well as a reader, like, who am I as a person and how do other people perceive me from the way that I project myself? As always, I love Muriel Barbary's characters. They're real and they're gritty and they're just great. But surprisingly enough, what I disliked the most about this book was what I liked the most about The Elegance of the Hedgehog, and that was her writing style. Muriel Barbary has this very beautiful, whimsical, decorative sort of writing style, kind of like Donna Tartt's, and you can guess that when she's writing from the perspective of a food critic, basically 40% of this book was just him describing food. And it wasn't like, oh, I ate a pizza with onions on top. It was more like, the tomato met the cheese in an endless battle of blah, 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 blah. And I don't know about you guys, but those kind of food critics really get on my nerve. So I would recommend first reading The Elegance of the Hedgehog, and if you really like The Elegance of the Hedgehog, give this book a try. The first book that I read this month was The Supernatural Enhancement by Edgar Quintero. Now, this book has quite an interesting format. The story is not told in the traditional way, but rather through various documents. You got recordings of conversations, you got receipts, you've got diaries and dream diaries, and kind of like summarizes of like therapy meetings. Is that how you'll say it? And did I say receipts? There's also receipts in here, and codes, and it's really quite interesting. And this book is about a pair of really interesting characters. One is called A. He's like a 26-year-old guy, I want to say, and his companion, sort of, is Naomi. Naomi is a 16-year-old punk rock kind of teenager. Now, they're both from London, if I'm not mistaken. And at the beginning of this book, A finds out that he just inherited this super huge mansion all the way out there in the USA from this twice-removed cousin that he never heard anything about. And if that's not weird enough, apparently his house that he just inherited, like the mansion, apparently is like the haunted house of the neighborhood. People tend to say that there's this ghost living there, and apparently all of the Wells, so he's a Wells, so basically all the Wells of the family that live there tried to commit suicide by jumping out the window. Emphasis on the tried, since for some reason all of them forgot to open the window. And you know, that's just weird, and that's just the beginning of the mystery. I really love this book. I think that this is a great example of how you do a book of this nature right. So with S by J.J. Abrams, I think it was, and House of Leaves, my main problem was that they were trying to have like all of these different things about their main mystery, and they're trying to give you all of these different hints from so many different directions that you just got so overly confused. Personally, I did not even finish S, and I did not understand anything in House of Leaves. Things were just really weird. And here what I liked is that Enda Quintero chose this is my main mystery here, guys, and I'm gonna really take you step by step. I didn't feel confused at any point in the book. I did feel confused in a sense oh, I'm supposed to not know what's going on, this is part of the mystery, but not in a sense the author is giving me hints that I just can't comprehend how they help the main mystery here. It was great. I think after reading S and after reading House of Leaves, which I did not enjoy really both of those books, this was a really good reading experience. He definitely took you step by step, he gave you all the hints, things were very direct, and you did get some of the answers by the end of the book, and not okay, I gave you all the hints, now figure this out because you're a smart reader, which is something that you gotta appreciate. And I have to say that people who loved the first 13 Lives of Harry August will love this book since it has the same sort of vibe. I'm not gonna say anything more since I don't want to spoil the book, but this is a great book, and I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. But this month, I finally thought about checking if Image Comics has an app. It does, and this is the start of a beautiful romance between me and individual issues. So the first issue that I read was the first issue of The Bounce. Now, The Bounce is basically a wannabe version of Deadpool, the superhero who's really snarky and really funny and whatnot, and I just didn't feel like it was anything that original. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars, and I do not see myself really continuing on with The Bounce. I just don't think that it's worth the money that you spend on the individual issues, so yeah. Then I read I Hate Fairyland, and I Hate Fairyland is definitely unique. I Hate Fairyland is Alice in Wonderland, except Alice goes to Fairyland, and then Alice is stuck there for 37 years. This cheaper, hyper sort of, world where everything is so la 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 and lovely. And it's basically 37 years of her searching for this damn key in order to get out of Fairyland. As you can guess, our Alice, who's not really called Alice, I'm just calling her Alice, turned into this really bitter, mean, violent kid that basically just wants to destroy Fairyland and find the damn key. It's quite fun, and keep in mind that it's very violent, but it's quite fun. And the last comic series that I read, which I read 4 volumes out of, is The Beauty, and currently it's kind of competing for the first place on my favorite comics list, up there with Runaways. The Beauty is about this world very much like our own, except that there's this sort of AIDS kind of disease, except instead of killing you, it makes you beautiful and young forever, instantly. And in the first volume, the main character that we sort of follow gets sick with the beauty, and he's the detective that's kind of in charge of finding out about anything that has to do with the beauty. And then people that are sick with the beauty start going off like fireworks or like atomic bombs, because who doesn't want to do that? This comic series has this really awesome balance between the very fast-paced, action-packed plot and just looking at beauty and really looking at the way that society looks at beauty, what people will do in order to be forever beautiful and young, which is quite interesting. There's a lot to think and a lot to discuss about this comic, and yet it's really fun and action-packed and fast-paced, and each individual issue felt like a volume. It was definitely, each issue was definitely very substantial, very interesting, definitely worth your money if you want to spend it on the individual issues, since if I'm not mistaken, there's no volume out yet. So this is one comic series that I will say it's worth each and every penny on each individual issue. 5 out of 5 stars, and I'm definitely going to read the 5th issue, which is the last available one on the app. I think it's the last one that came out as well, so hopefully more will come out since this series is magnifique. So that's all for this video. I would love to hear your opinions about these books. Have you read any? Are you going to read any of them? And let me know what you're reading the month of January. Like, feel free to leave me a link down below to January wrap up. I would love to check it out. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you'll have a fantastic rest of the day, and I will see you in my next video. Goodbye.